A millionaire disinherited his son for marrying a humble woman, and almost fainted when he visited them in the village where they lived. What did the millionaire see? This story will reveal a meaning that will leave you impressed. Manuel Hurtado was sitting in his imposing leather armchair, in the center of the luxurious living room of the mansion. The walls displayed paintings by renowned artists and the furniture shone with an impeccable finish, evident signs of his wealth. He looked at his son Alejandro with a mixture of disbelief and rage. "I always gave you everything, Alejandro, everything, and this is how you thank me? Throwing away our name, our fortune, for a woman with no future. A girl with no education, no class, no anything." His voice resonated in the high walls, charged with contempt. Alejandro breathed deeply, firm, although a knot in his throat made it difficult to speak. "Dad, love is not measured by money or last name. I love Elena and that's the only thing that matters to me." His voice was controlled, but there was an unwavering determination behind every word. Manuel stood up abruptly, slamming his fist on the walnut table. "Choose your words carefully, boy. Her or the fortune, one of the Hurtado family. I will not tolerate this nonsense. Either you leave her out of your life or you're out of this house." The silence that followed was so dense that it seemed to absorb the air in the room. Alejandro raised his chin resolutely. "I choose her." His words cut Manuel's heart like a knife, but he showed no weakness. He just pointed to the door. "Then go, Alejandro, and don't come back. You are no longer my son." The coldness in Manuel's voice made Alejandro's stomach sink, but he simply took the suitcase he had already prepared and walked towards the door. Outside, Elena was waiting for him. Her simple dress fluttered in the cool night breeze, and her eyes shone with a mixture of emotion and concern. "Are you sure about this, Alejandro? I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." Her voice was delicate, almost a whisper, but full of genuine concern. Alejandro smiled slightly and hugged her tightly. "You are the only thing that matters. Without you, I would have nothing, even if I were surrounded by gold." Alejandro and Elena arrived in the small town of Oaxaca at dawn. The landscape contrasted drastically with the luxury of Monterrey. Dirt streets, colorful houses with simple facades, and the welcoming aroma of freshly made tortillas. Don Pedro, Elena's father, was waiting on the porch of the adobe house, his face serious, although there was a glint of curiosity in his eyes. "So this is the young man who left everything for my daughter," he said, wiping his mud-stained hands on a worn cloth. "Yes, sir. And I will do whatever it takes to prove that I made the right decision," Alejandro replied without looking away. Don Pedro raised an eyebrow as if analyzing every word. "Well, let's see if those fine hands know how to work with clay. There's no time here for people who only know how to talk." Alejandro swallowed hard but nodded. It was a new beginning and he was ready to start from scratch. The following days were a test of endurance. Alejandro, who had never touched anything other than a pen or a keyboard, now soiled his hands daily in Don Pedro's pottery workshop. "Ceramics is like love," the man said one morning while skillfully shaping a piece. "It must be firm but also gentle. If you press too hard, it breaks. If you don't, it never takes shape." Alejandro smiled shyly, his hands still clumsy. "I think I'll need a lot more practice." While Alejandro struggled to adapt, Elena took jobs in the town to help with expenses. She sewed clothes, prepared sweets to sell in the market, and sometimes worked as a waitress in the local cantina. But it wasn't easy. The women of the town murmured every time she passed by. "Don Pedro's daughter brought a rich boy here," one would say. "I want to see how long he lasts in this hard life," added another. Elena listened but pretended not to care. Her focus was on Alejandro, although sometimes she herself wondered if he would resist. One night, after an exhausting day, Alejandro found Elena sitting on the small terrace of the house, looking at the starry sky. He sat beside her and let out a long sigh. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm enough for you, Elena. Everything you do for us while I can barely mold a piece of clay without ruining it." Elena turned to him and held his face tenderly. "Alejandro, you left everything to be with me. That already says more than anything else. And you'll find your way here, I know it." Financial difficulties were tighter than ever. The small makeshift pottery workshop in the town was a desperate attempt by Alejandro to help maintain the house, but sales barely covered basic expenses. The local square was full of experienced artisans, and the competition was fierce. Alejandro, accustomed to business meetings in luxurious offices, now spent hours under the scorching sun trying to attract customers. "Please try this piece," he would say with a hopeful smile, holding out a hand-painted ceramic bowl. But the responses were almost always biting. A man looked at him and scoffed. "A Hurtado selling pottery? This is too good. You should charge triple just for the last name." Each comment hurt like a stab, but Alejandro refused to give up. He returned home exhausted, his hands dirty with clay and his pride wounded, but without letting his discouragement show completely in front of Elena. She, in turn, did her best to keep the house running, although the weight was evident. The tension between them grew, even though they both tried to support each other. The ghost of Monterrey seemed to be present in every corner, in the words of the inhabitants and in the critical glances in the square. Meanwhile, in the luxurious Hurtado mansion, Manuel maintained his facade of indifference. Sitting in his office, he listened to his assistant's report on the difficulties Alejandro was facing in the town. "He's living like a peasant, sir, selling pottery in the square. It seems that the decision he made wasn't so brilliant." The assistant expected a sarcastic comment, but Manuel remained silent for a moment before replying coldly. "He made his decision. Let him bear the consequences." However, the unease that grew within him was something not even he could ignore. One night, as Alejandro closed the makeshift workshop, a shadow that had been following him through the narrow streets of the town stopped suddenly. He stopped and turned abruptly. "Who's there?" he asked firmly, although his voice betrayed his nervousness. A tall man with a cold gaze emerged from the shadows. "Calm down. I'm not here to hurt you. I have a message from your father." Alejandro narrowed his eyes, his heart racing. "My father? What does he want now?" The man handed him a sealed envelope. "He doesn't want you to come back, but he wants you to know that he's watching you, always." The message was short, but it had a weight that Alejandro felt like a blow to the stomach. He read the words several times, but decided not to tell Elena anything. She already has enough to worry about, he thought as he hid the envelope in a corner of the small workshop. However, the feeling of being watched began to haunt him. Life brought a small respite when Elena met Rosa, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile and contagious energy. The owner of a small restaurant in town, Rosa was a beloved figure in the community. "So you are the famous Elena," Rosa said when they met in the market. "I've heard the venomous tongues of this town talk about you too. Don't pay attention to them. Those people have more envy than common sense." Elena, accustomed to the looks of disapproval, felt immediate relief in Rosa's company. They began to converse, and Rosa, realizing the couple's situation, made an unexpected offer. "Why don't you come work with me at the restaurant? I need someone I can trust, and I think you could do well." Elena hesitated for a moment. "I don't know if I can accept, Rosa. I don't want it to seem like we are abusing your kindness." Rosa shook her head, laughing. "Nonsense. I've seen many couples like you, young and in love but crushed by life. Don't let the weight of the world steal your love, dear." The sun was at its highest point when Manuel Hurtado stepped out of his luxurious, dust-covered car in the middle of the town. He wore an impeccable suit that completely clashed with the rural surroundings, but his gaze was steely. He walked with firm steps towards the small workshop where Alejandro was molding a ceramic bowl. There he was, covered in clay, with calloused hands and a sweaty face, but focused on his work. Manuel stopped at the entrance, watching in silence until, unable to contain himself, he finally spoke. "What have you done to yourself, Alejandro? Is this what you chose for your life?" Alejandro stopped what he was doing but didn't wipe his hands. He stood up, leaving the piece on the makeshift table. "I chose to live with dignity, father. Something that not all the money in the world can buy." Manuel narrowed his eyes, his voice hardening. "Dignity? This isn't dignity, this is mediocrity. You had the world in your hands and you threw it all away for a whim." Alejandro stepped forward, his gaze fixed. "I didn't throw anything away. I'm building something that's mine. Something you could never understand." The tension increased when Manuel pointed to Elena, who was watching the scene from the doorway. You destroyed my son. He had everything and now he's here a nobody. All because of you." Elena blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears, but her voice came out firm. I didn't destroy him, I rebuilt him. Today he's more of a man than he ever was under your shadow, Mr. Hurtado. Her words cut through the air, and for a moment Manuel was speechless before the silence became unbearable. Don Pedro appeared, carrying a piece of pottery. He handed the bowl to Manuel, who took it reluctantly. This is not just pottery, Don Pedro said, his voice grave and full of wisdom. It is the heart of a man who learned to be humble. Tell me, Mr. Hurtado, what is worth more? A man who obeys or a man who lives? Manuel looked at the piece, its rough texture contrasting with the delicate shine of the glaze. He saw the imperfections, but he also perceived the dedication and effort in every detail. Something inside him began to crumble. The days following that visit were unexpected. Manuel began to appear in the town more frequently, always discreetly. He watched Alejandro working, he saw Elena coordinating Rosa's restaurant, and little by little he began to realize what he had ignored all his life: the value of simple things. He felt small seeing how the couple supported each other, facing every difficulty with love and courage. One sunny afternoon, Manuel called Alejandro and Elena to talk. They looked at him cautiously, but he surprised them. I was wrong, Alejandro, he began, his voice trembling. You have taught me something that my money could never buy: true love. If you allow me, I want to be a part of this. Alejandro crossed his arms doubtfully. And what does that mean, Dad? Manuel took a deep breath. I want to help you, finance a store in Monterrey where you can sell your pieces and teach your art. But this time as equals. Not as my subordinate son, but as a man with his own path. Elena took Alejandro's hand, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Alejandro extended his hand towards his father. If that's the case, we accept. Manuel squeezed his hand, and that gesture seemed to seal something that words never could. Months later, the pottery shop in Monterrey was a success. Alejandro's pieces, marked by his dedication and learning, attracted customers from all over. The village of Oaxaca also prospered, with Don Pedro and the other artisans gaining more recognition thanks to Manuel's connections. But the greatest gift for everyone came on a special night at Rosa's restaurant, where the family was gathered to celebrate Elena's birthday. Manuel, once so distant, now laughed and joked as he held Alejandro and Elena's newborn baby. He looked at the baby with a genuine smile, something Alejandro hadn't seen in years. This is the true Hurtado legacy, Manuel said, making everyone laugh with the awkward way he cradled the little one. Elena looked at Alejandro, squeezing his hand under the table. Everything they had been through had led them there.